is our spec building out in Oak Brook, which started as a spec building. We had a bunch of groups that were very interested in it, which is great. Some of these groups were interested, and this goes on to previous question on the ownership aspect. Some of the groups are very interested in the ownership aspect, some weren't. One was a private equity fuel company, and they had zero interest on putting a penny into it. They just wanted as much TI as you could pencil. We had another group that's a well-known system that has a propensity to want to own their assets. Fortunately, our location helped them get over that, to the fact that they're still going to lease it from us. But it was interesting because it seems like a lot of these healthcare systems these days, at least in Chicago, are less focused on getting in the JV structure, but they seem to be interested on long-term ownership.
Welcome to today's episode of the Providers, Properties, and Performance podcast for an interview with Jay Held, the Vice President of Development and Managing Broker at MedProperties Group. MedProperties Group started with the CEO's development of ASCs and sprung into developing medical office buildings. I know firsthand they deliver beautifully designed, functional, and high-quality medical office buildings to the market. Jay shares how MedProperties Group is developing according to trends and demands, as well as their flexibility to offer physician ownership for those practices interested in building equity. Thank you, and welcome, Jay. So Jay, welcome to the Providers, Properties, and Performance podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Jay, obviously MedProperties in the name is focused on healthcare real estate assets, but do you want to give us the background story behind it and where you've been and kind of how you guys got started?
That's a great question. It's actually a pretty interesting story. So our CEO and founder, Matt Campbell, started a it was called same-day surgery. He started rolling up surgery centers throughout the Chicagoland market. I believe they got to 20 or 25 surgery centers throughout the area. And once that all came together and was up and running, he exited to USPI, one of the large acute surgery center providers. And part of that, he had this experience of building out and operating these ASCs. And my understanding is even some of them were still owned by the PropCo, not the operating company, which was sold. And that is how MedProperties started. So from there, I went into, and Matt leading the way, into working with health systems on built-to-suit medical offices, leveraging that ASC and healthcare experience that no one really had unless you were hospital administrator or a doctor. So that's the genesis of it. Same-day surgery started, I believe, in 1994, and MedProperties has been around since the early 2000s. And since then, we've focused on the development of medical office buildings and ASCs in both the Chicagoland market and then also down in your market, Phoenix.
Yeah, you have a lot, and your properties are beautiful.
Thank you. I take no credit.
You take no credit. Well, there's a team behind you for sure. So how did you start your career focusing on the healthcare real estate asset class?
It's kind of interesting timing. I mean, I used to be, I started out at a college as a tenant rep at a company that's not pushing the Wakefield to move over to JLL about halfway through my 9-year tenant rep career. And coincidentally, I had a couple former JLL coworkers that were at MedProperties. One was a neighbor. Long story short, had a dinner, spent some more time with him. And next thing you knew, 12 months later, I was sitting next to him at MedProperties. But it was fortunate timing. You know, I started March 1 of 2020. So literally as COVID was entering. So, you know, my old job would have been even harder than it was in the tenant rep office field. So it's kind of opportune timing. So I've been at MedProperties coming up on 2 years this winter.
Very nice. And you guys are headquartered in Chicago. You have assets here in Arizona, but where else do you focus geographically?
You know, yeah, while we're very heavy in Chicago and obviously in Arizona, you know, there's a conscious effort to, you know, expand in the Midwest, and obviously expand in the Phoenix metro area as well. So, you know, we're not focused on a Florida, we're not focused on a California, we're not focused on the East Coast. It's really kind of maximizing the states around us and those relationships around us. And then also, Arizona is a good place to do business. Arizona doesn't have a CON. So also, you know, growing our Arizona business as well.
And what does a good opportunity look like for MedProperties?
You know, it's easy to say, you know, it can be an RFP process on a, you know, hospital-owned piece of dirt. It can be, you know, a good piece of dirt that we like and going out and trying to find a tenant, you know, amongst myself, amongst some of our broker partners. So we can kind of do it two ways. And then thirdly, in Chicago, in the western suburbs, Oak Brook, we actually did our first spec project in a Hines, a development called Oak Brook Commons, which is, I don't know how familiar you are with Chicago, but Oak Brook is kind of when you go west of the city, it's kind of the main office hub that's not in the city. So there's a Hines development, mixed use. We've got about an acre of land in there that we're doing an MOB. We break ground in just a few weeks. And that was our first spec deal. We thought, you know, this location, the demand, you know, if we build it, they will come and knock on wood or in lease. And hopefully the lease gets, you know, wrapped up in the next few weeks. So we'll be breaking ground right as we have a completed lease. So a spec building that started as a spec building that, knock on wood, will be, you know, when we break ground, won't be a spec building anymore.
Do you do that in Arizona?
We don't. I would say we probably should, based on the demand and the velocity out there.
Yeah. So when you develop a building and you're attracting, in medical building, you're attracting physicians to it, do you guys have any sort of structure for physician ownership, or is it purely just lease?
You know, it's interesting. That seems to be very common, almost a requirement in Phoenix. You know, from some of the deals we've looked at, you know, I don't know if it's a retention thing with the health systems. You know, we've heard it from health systems, we've heard it from individual physicians. It's certainly something we've offered and we've considered and have done in the past, especially on some of the surgery centers we developed. But I mean, we think, you know, to a certain extent, having a partner, whether it's a health system or physician group, I mean, it kind of aligns everyone. You know, it also proves to the market when it's time to exit that the tenant's sticky, very sticky. So yeah, that's certainly something we look at, and, you know, seems common practice to us now.
And do you have a interesting transaction story you want to share with the audience? One that's, I mean, none of them ever turn out the way you plan, but is there one in particular that on top of your mind?
A lot of them, since I started a little less than 2 years ago, started right after I came on, and we're still hoping to finish them. We're very close on a handful. So, you know, I'd say the most interesting one, and it's probably is our spec building out in Oak Brook, which started as a spec building. You know, we had a bunch of groups that were very interested in it, which is great. And And, some of these groups were interested, and this goes on to previous question about the ownership aspect. Some of the groups are very interested in the ownership aspect, some weren't. One was a private equity fuel company, and they had zero interest on putting a penny into it. They just wanted as much TI as you could pencil. We had another group that's a well-known system that has a propensity to want to own their assets. Fortunately, our location helped them get over that, to the fact that they're still going to lease it from us. But it was interesting because it seems like a lot of these healthcare systems these days, at least in Chicago, are less focused on getting in the JV structure, but they seem to be interested on long-term ownership. So this project that we're working on, and we'll see what happens. The building has yet broke ground yet. It'll be several years before they've been occupied. But that's a long-winded answer of the most interesting one, just because you had 2 or 3 systems that were looking at it completely differently.
And I mean, are you guys able to offer ownership to some, but not others, like really be able to accommodate what the tenant's looking for? If someone just wants tenant improvements, obviously being able to try to work with them as much as you can. And then another one that does want some physician ownership. Are you guys able to offer different opportunities?
Yeah, and I think absolutely. I think again, it gets everyone aligned, and I think it doesn't do anything but kind of help create a stronger partnership that everyone's got the same goals to keep costs low, deliver on time, and deliver good products. So yeah, it's certainly something we would never turn that down for the tenants wanting a piece of the deal.
And does MedProperties prefer to do just medical office buildings, maybe with a surgery center? Or are you guys getting into any specialty hospitals or anything like that?
Right now we haven't. We've really tried to focus on the medical office building and ASCs. Typically the ASC is part of the building. It's not a standalone, just because, at least in my experience, there are less of those. But there are some different, I guess, it's kind of this whole office versus medtail, retail, accessibility concept comes along. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road, our future projects have a wider range of services provided, like a micro hospital or emergency room. I think the biggest driver for us is the tenant than anything else.
And how has the pandemic affected your approach, if at all, to pursuing opportunities? Do you guys, do you factor in kind of an unknown black swan event, or how are you kind of processing what happened during the pandemic to your future endeavors?
Yeah, I'd say, this is, I kind of joke with my coworkers at my old job, but nothing's really, fortunately, slowed down. I mean, everything slowed down a little bit, and things have been put on hold for 6 to 9 months. But everything that we had started or had planned to start has either been completed or is restarted again. So I think it's hard to say, we're not planning or we're not expecting things to totally shut down and stop completely. There's, right or wrong, that fear is not really in the back of our minds. If anything, I'd say it feels like activity's kind of ramped up, to bring the care up to where the population is. And, the projects might be a little bit smaller, but I think the velocity is still there as these health systems try to get closer to their patient base.
Yeah, I agree. I have, when I meet new people and they're like, oh, you're in commercial real estate, how's that going? And, then I have to qualify that I'm in a niche of healthcare real estate, yeah. Which, it took a pause like everybody else, but that in fact, it's incredibly sustainable because of, it's it has a purpose to being there. And the tenants you can't take a family practice doctor and have them operate out of their house. Yes, they can take some virtual calls from there, but they can't examine a patient there. So, so that, it's a purpose driven. And this happened, when, I think retail too, it was when retail had to adjust to, I guess, the Amazon effect, for lack of a better word. I got the same sort of question, like, oh my gosh, you're in commercial real estate. What's happening? Like, everything's going online. And you're like, well, not in healthcare. I mean, it
can't. I don't lease Kmart, so we'll be okay. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see, a couple of our projects have been, when I say large for, my experience, 60 to 80,000 feet. But it seems like there's some other groups out there that are kind of targeting that these opportunities out there. And it's like we're really blurring the line of retail versus a medical building. And I think for MedProperties, just self-promotion, I think, and for a tenant, even if it was a small out parcel in a mixed use or retail development, it's, if it's a good healthcare system, we're indifferent to, just because someone might consider retail. If there's clinical space in there, it's certainly things that we would, take a look at.
Absolutely. And where do you think, do you think that healthcare where do you think healthcare may be heading, like in the next 3 to 5 years, healthcare real estate, based on changes in healthcare, the fact that maybe, there might be a little bit more focus on preventative care as a result of the pandemic, maybe not, but where do you see like all these trends and affecting how healthcare real estate responds to them?
Man, this, I'm not going to want to watch this 3 to 5 years from now, because it could be 100% off.
You won't be held. Yeah. Your feet aren't held to the fire. This is based on what you know today and kind of go from there.
I mean, I think it's going to be getting out into the patient bases and the communities. There was a Revista event I listened to maybe 6 months ago. And one of the panelists down there basically said, in the future, we imagine a hospital being only for, trauma, a pandemic type event, and that's, or very complicated procedures. Everything else should be done outside of the hospital. So I think it's going to continue to move everything off campus. And I think there'll be more medical office requirements, but I think we'll see, there might be more deals, but there are more activity, but I think the average size is going to go down, just spread out, not like you're jumping in Starbucks or Walgreens around a MSA, but I think it's going to continue to be more of these accessible clinical spaces for the patient bases.
Yeah, and I mean, you can speak to Chicago because it's much more dense for sure, but in Arizona, we have that opportunity because we have land. And so, if where you're looking at is too dense, in some areas, you can just go a couple blocks down and, try to negotiate a piece of land out of somebody. But in Chicago, do you see things being torn down and different new things being built that are more able to be flexible, or do you see the developments in being less square footage footprints?
So we had this conversation with a big office landlord a few weeks ago. The question was, so what development projects are you doing like in the city of Chicago, like in the CBD? And it's, and to your point on having more land, there's very limited activity in, Chicago people see on TV and the pictures of the skyline. There's a couple big health systems. Those are all, almost exclusively owned by them. They're building new buildings in their old parking lots and doing parking decks on existing land that they have. But in the suburbs, that's where almost all the activity and all of the requirements are for these healthcare systems. So the, exclusion of like a Rush that's in, kind of the West Loop, Northwestern, Shirley Ryan, Lurie Children's, that's, next to the John Hancock Center in Streeterville, where there's, literally no land. Even the parking lots are owned by a healthcare system. A lot of the demand is moving out towards and into the suburbs. So I think it's probably pretty similar to what's going on in Phoenix, in the Chicago suburbs, and then downtown Chicago is kind of its own thing. And those tend to be bigger requirements on campus owned by health systems.
Well, and construction costs, as I'm sure you know very well, are fluctuating and going up. So with this, do you think that you guys will just try to do more volume in a concentrated area to get economies of scale, maybe rather than just one large footprint of a building in an area?
I think that's a good idea.
It doesn't work that way.
I would say, the phone hasn't rang yet for someone saying they want 5 new buildings. I hope it does, but the construction costs are certainly a concern and an issue. For one building we're doing, obviously steel has been a big issue. By chance we had planned it out as a concrete building at 7 stories tall with parking in the middle. Had it been steel, we probably would have had to gone back to the drawing board, while we're working on our construction drawings. Fortunately, you can still get concrete. Fortunately, we're using post-tension concrete beams versus steel beams. So you got to your point, you got to kind of think how you're going to build and what you're going to build, because again, if our building was designed steel, which it easily could have been when we were planning it a year and a half ago, we got to the drawing board.
And with how do you see the construction costs being? So it costs you more to build a building. You have to raise more money or borrow more money. How do you see that affecting how you guys are able to do tenant improvements and then lease rates? How are you guys managing tenant expectations? Is there sticker shock, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's going to be tough for everyone to swallow. I think the only saving grace for the developer doing a new construction, ground up development, is that your competition of an existing facility is also going to have those same constraints. So I think, unfortunately, option A, lease from an existing building, or option B, build the building new, they're both going to go up, which unfortunately seems to be where things are headed in everything today. So I don't want to hope it's not normal, but it might be.
Everyone just rises with the tide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Jay, we're going to move into getting to know you.
Okay.
So what was your first job?
Well, my first job, I was a caddy at a local country club. That was in high school. My first real job out of college, I started at a company called Equus, which turned into a company, like 15 different company names. And it turned into Cushman & Wakefield eventually. So I graduated college, like most people, in 2011. At least I say that to make myself feel better, with no job, limited prospects. Spent 6 months trying to get a job in commercial real estate. Finally landed a tenant rep opportunity with a great team. Did that for 4 years at my first employer, which was great. It was trying to hustle office space in downtown Chicago to law firms or local businesses, 3,000 to 15,000 feet. It was fun. It was tough. It took a few years to get running. But I look back on those days and think, man, I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore. Especially in today's world, it's even harder to get meetings, harder to prospect. So yeah, that's my first job.
What would you be doing for a living if you were not in the healthcare real estate industry?
It's a good question. I'm into aviation, so potentially a pilot or something like that. Or I don't know. I'm also into automotive stuff, so maybe something in the automotive industry. Not a desk job, something cool.
Like a race car driver.
Race car driver, or working for the race car driver team or something like that. I don't have the guts to be a race car driver.
Well, that was one of the only sports that was being televised for a while during the pandemic. So my son got kind of hooked on that. So it was kind of funny.
A lot of all my friends and people I know are now like, it seems like a lot of people watch Formula One. I haven't caught the bug, but it seems pretty popular now.
Who are you reading or listening to right now for news, information, or inspiration?
I like the Wall Street Journal. I mean, that one's just easy. Books. I need to set a goal for next year to read or at least do books on tape for more books. I'm embarrassed to tell you how many books I've read since college. It's not many. Watch a lot of TV, that's for sure. But and then inspiration. Honestly, read a lot of home magazines or just the circulars that you get. Just
are you remodeling?
A little bit. My wife and I like to just do little stuff here and there that we can DIY ourselves. Nothing fancy, nothing too complex, but yeah, just little things around the house on the weekends when we're not taking care of our daughter.
Yeah. How old is your daughter?
She's almost 11 months, so it's been a fun year. Yeah. I'd say she's a pandemic baby, but we realized you were pregnant right before everyone got sent home from work, so she's just a pre-pandemic baby.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, we were remodeling a couple of years ago, and I would devour all of those magazines when they came home, and now I just throw them out because I don't want to look at them.
I look at the prices and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna put this picture in and see what I can get for a $0 less, because that's out of the budget.
Yeah, I don't want to be inspired anymore. I don't want any more new ideas.
Yeah.
What is one thing you do every day for healthy self-care?
One thing I do every day for healthy self-care is I make sure to spend as much time as I can with our daughter. I used to, my wife and I both, before she was pregnant, we had kids, we would be pretty good regimen of going to the gym or working out or doing we did a few half marathons, which were great. Between now living in the suburbs, commuting downtown, having the baby, it's, I also don't want to admit how many times I've worked out in the last year and a half, but, just spending as much time as I can with my daughter and my wife together, put her to bed. That's good for the mental health.
Oh, absolutely. And it goes by fast. So
yeah, the days are long, but the years are fast.
Exactly.
Someone told me.
Yeah, that is true. Are leaders born or trained?
Excuse me?
Do you feel leaders are born or trained?
Oh, this is the nature versus nurture question I remember from a psychology class in high school. I think some people are born better than others, but I think you can be trained to be just as effective. I think being a good person, I think, working hard, showing a good example, can make you a good leader without, being born with the that kind of big voice or big energy, I think you can make up for it in other ways.
Great.
I'd say I was not born a leader, that's for sure, but hopefully by set a good example to my peers.
Fatherhood will start that. We'll start that.
Yeah, there's no option.
There's no option. You have no choice. You've started down the path. Well, thank you, Jay. This has been a great interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for the opportunity. And maybe